Okay, here we go with another flow dynamic exercise, which means everything created visually and spoken now comes from a completely spontaneous place. What you're looking at is a sequence of photographs that I found in my archives of Jude, my wife, from a long time ago. Never printed any from it. And forgot about the shoot. So when I found them, I thought it'd be cool to create a little collection. I toned them and processed these images. They were probably taken from the late 90s. So on like a first generation digital Nikon D1, the first professional digital camera, which was my introduction into digital photography. So here I am. What I did is I put a black coat on the surface of the, what do you call it, the binder, and now I'm beginning the process of painting. What's going on is that you could see a heart. Now this heart, even that is coming kind of from some space of intuition. And that's what my flow dynamic exercises are about. They are a practice, a way of being in a state of flow. And when I refer to a flow state, I'm describing a perspective on reality, if you can describe it that way, a observation or experience of reality that one would say has such factors like there's no stress, there's no dis-ease, there's no tension, there's no anger. Everything's very relaxed and fluid, almost like riding a wave, whether it's a small wave or a tsunami, mega wave. In both cases, the state of consciousness is very fluid, very open. It's very much feeling through the five senses, being very present. And so I've just picked up this pencil that I'm using now to kind of penetrate the wet paint and dry, pulling through the undercoat of black a little bit. And these lines are being created through this exercise. And the value for me as an artist or a creative, however you want to see it, but let's say you're a person who is interested to utilize creativity either directly by part of a career or a passion, or indirectly, meaning let's say you're in business or you are in engineering or the sciences, accounting, it doesn't matter. Creativity is valuable in all aspects of life. And you could say one who utilizes their creativity, their creative aspect, is able to innovate, is able to problem solve, is able to bring a visionary solution that benefits the social structure ultimately, because you're adding a kind of metaphorical stepping stone. I'm using an old, the process you're seeing here. So I'm going back and forth between describing flow dynamics and the process that's unfolding. So the practice is spontaneous. I have various tools and materials surrounding this location. And so in spontaneity form, I pulled out this tray of Holbein Artist gouache paints. And of course, they're very old, I'm discovering, and they've dried out. I pulled out the X-Acto blade, cut it in half, and I'm painting with what I can squeeze out of the tube. And you see, that's an example of confronting a problem It's a minute level, of course, but any creative would understand when they're in the middle of making something and maybe a string breaks if you're a musician, or the brush doesn't work the way you want. There's all kinds of unexpected interferences that you could call it that could get in the way of a process. And this exercise is a way of, see, the next piece of paint is also, the tube of paint is also dried out. So this process is a way, this exercise, if you want to call it a meditation of sorts, is a way of embracing whatever happens and utilizing that breakdown or that broken tool or that unexpected accident to be an accepted part of the process. And that's because the exercise is about being present. So there is no premeditated outcome intended. And if there is one, then you become disrupted because it's not going the way you want it to go. So you can see this exercise. In this case, I'm using the exercise in a project. It's not just a piece of paper where I'm practicing the flow dynamic exercise. I actually utilize the flow dynamic exercise even when I'm working on commissions and projects. And it goes beyond whatever it is I'm actually creating. It's utilized as much as I can by being conscious in my life. And that could be standing online at a supermarket, driving down the street. It doesn't matter what we're doing. But in the terms of the application for artistry or creativity, imagine that this flow state that I'm referring to is a dynamic capacity of accessing creativity, a way of going according to the Joseph Campbell term, the hero's journey, which is a metaphor for going outside your comfort zone to discover the treasures in your life. You could say that this creative process is really about going outside your comfort zone. And how to do that? Well, there's a vulnerability to it. There's an openness to it. It's a way that I describe by being tampering down on the noise that comes from the thinking mind during the process. That could be judgmental. That meaning, oh, this sucks. Oh, I can't believe this is dried out. Oh, that's not the color I wanted. Just in relevancy to this, you could see any myriad of voice narrative could be coming from your thought process as you're going through a creation making experience, whatever the medium is. It could be music, poetry, it could be acting. I'm saying this is a universal phenomenon. I'm demonstrating how I can practice. And by the way, I practice flow dynamic exercises in many variant ways. This way is what I call a flow line drawing, flow line face, which is now I can see it's becoming more clear. There's a face in there, which was always a peculiar phenomenon that when I utilize line drawing exercises, over 90%, I think, of the time, a face comes forth. I have been commissioned often to create abstracts that, for example, the quantum series, Quantum Noir, I think it was, and there was a white series, Quantum. Those don't contain faces in them, but the flow dynamic line exercise is everywhere. I'm seeing here, as I'm going through, some of these tools haven't been used in a while, and so I noticed, wow, these brushes were stiff. Now, these aren't my finest brushes. I have different series and collections of tools. The tools that you see present are the ones meant to be manhandled, if you'd call it that. Basically, muscled in. I'm not worried about it. It's not an expensive sable brush or even the X-Acto blade. I have fine ones that I use, of course, just for cutting paper and things like that. I would never use those here. The one that's here is one that's meant to be getting dirty with, abused in a way. And that allows me a certain kind of modality of freedom. But at the same time, within arm's reach, I have all the higher quality tools if I need a specialty brush or I need that other X-Acto knife. And in this case, now I'm essentially, though, drawing the inspiration, you could say, or the initial draw that kind of has your hand go to pick up something. And imagine you're surrounded by a variety of things. Well, where's that coming from? That's the exercise. It's the practice is to get in awareness or sensitivity that the impulse is not coming from the thought first. It could end up there, but if you look closely, it's really an inner observational exercise. I'm suggesting it's coming from a place a little deeper and a little lower. I often refer to it symbolically as the heart, and I always refer to my heart as a compass. And so the essential exercise is to essentially quiet the mind. And I can do that by not necessarily enforcing, because it can't be enforced. You can try and arm wrestle with your thoughts, and I think you may find you can almost always lose that struggle. Therefore, instead of arguing with the mind or struggling with the mind, and it's more about returning into an observational point, meaning observe it. I can hear the thoughts. I may hear the judgment. Oh, this sucks, whatever the self-criticism could be. Could also be positive things too. But the positive ones don't seem to throw us out of alignment. It's the negative thoughts, the judgments, the discrimination. Also, they're coming from memory and previous belief systems, everything that nurtured us to being who we are right now. And part of the journey as the artist for me is to get beyond who I currently am, because I see the creative process as an adventure or as an exploration. And therefore, it means, by the very definition, to go beyond what I know into the unknown, because I'm here to discover something new. And whether that manifests in terms of a recognizable style or not is always secondary to me. And that's why I'm not a big fan of organizing work in collections. Not that, and I can understand why that's done in the market of art for collectors and for curators, gallerists, who sometimes require more of a structure and understanding an artist. I prefer to simply timeline everything. And this is the journey. And I am not bound by the need for there to be a recognizable by who structure of how the art is formed. That perhaps from a marketing standpoint isn't going to be as valuable, but my creation process, it doesn't get hampered by that. If I want to look at my body of work and build out or curate a collection, I can do that. And there's always a narrative that can be told. So I'm never concerned that this is going to be ultimately a problem, because staying true to my process means I'm in exploration mode, and I'm going to let the work be what it is. And I don't want my insecurity or marketing or sales forces to interfere with that. Not when I'm in pure creation mode, at least. when I'm in commission mode, when I'm in a project or collaboration mode. Of course, there's more factors, and there's integration, there's cooperation, there's community, there's collaboration, all those collective words, the co-words, and those are very important. I think it's very valuable, and the world and societies need that now more than ever. We need to develop interactivity with each other. There's been too much in the last few years of polarization, separatization, isolation, identification in radical positions. There's a whole bunch of neural garbage out there that is creating a lot of consequential crisis in mind and social fabric. And for me, yes, this essential process is a very internal, self-oriented experience. But ultimately, what is the point of all this? It must be for something greater than ourselves. At least for me, that's my wish, that my work and the meaning behind the work, or the process behind the work, lives in some value form, in some way, even if it's not tangible physically, but just that I'm resonating a consequence of this practice. And if this practice essentially, from my experience, induces the feeling or the experience of harmony, or an integration, if you could say, with the body. Look, I'm using my hands, my mind. I'm not abandoning my thoughts, but I'm not driven by them first. I'm allowing another dimension to come through. What's that? I'm calling that gateway my heart. I'm not necessarily saying that the heart is the source, but perhaps the heart is the compass, or the aspect of my beingness that allows me to experience guidance from another dimension of intelligence. Whether that you want to say that's me, or that's divine, or that's God consciousness, quantum consciousness, cosmic intelligence. There's a word for it in every camp, in every school system. Whatever that is, just as Einstein, referred to imagination being more important than knowledge, he's referring to, and I remember from his bio, using a violin to enter into this relaxed, open-minded state. And his greatest formulas and ideas came to him. He always said they didn't come from him, they came to him. And then he used his intellect, he used his body, he used his creative capabilities in a harmonized and integrative way to bring these intuitive concepts and ideas to a manifested fashion for society. And therefore, the ultimate goal of this exercise for me as an artist is that we are helping bridge or build a foundation for which humanity can take a next step. I think it's in Torrance, Southern California, beach town, on one of the public buildings. It's either the courthouse or the library. It's inlaid in the architecture. It says, where, I think, if I remember correctly, it says, where there is no vision, society perishes. That may come, I forget where that quote comes from. It might be biblical or from Aristotle. I'm not sure. But we get the vision, or we get the point that society needs vision. Where does vision come from? Well, I'm putting forth that the creative process, as I'm demonstrating here, even though it's manifesting it in a drawing form, is really where this dynamic of intelligence or innovation or finding the next step of growth that becomes part of society, that's what we all can participate in. That's why I've always emphasized in school systems, creativity should not be looked at as something just developmental for those who are getting involved in the creative arts or artists. I always thought that was a big mistake by the education system. All facets, all careers of life that a student will eventually find their way into, whatever it is, requires creativity in their field. That's what's going to make a dentist become innovative in his field. It's going to make the accountant innovative in problem solving in new ways in his field. In every aspect of life, we need creativity to flower to the next dimension. By the way, I'm on day 4 of a fast. So it's also interesting that I'm kind of practicing this absolutely spontaneous expression in word while I haven't ingested solids for 4 days. Yeah, I'm doing, I'm on a fast for a minimum of 10 days. We'll see if I go beyond that. I'm on day 4 right now, and it does feel fantastic. I'm doing my morning Shaolin exercises, the fundamentals, which I also share. That's a technique I utilize to bring my body, mind, and self-awareness, or spirit, if you want to call it, into a harmonized, balanced state. It realigns the bones, the joints, muscle tissue. It gets chi flowing, which is your life force energy, from fingertip to toe tip. The fundamental element or practice is about 15 minutes long. The full exercise system that would be more aerobic integration with push-ups and sit-ups, that one's about 45 minutes long. But regardless of what my day looks like, I do my best every day to at least just get the 15-minute one in, and it's a substantial awareness shifter. It really brings me back to a center point of sorts. And I also, I've been doing that for over 30 years. And I can tell you, with great confidence, that it's what kept me out of hospitals and doctors' offices. Without giving away the details of my age, I'll let you know. I'm, without disease. And I attribute a lot of that to the practice of utilizing the body aspect, the mental aspect, and this awareness practice so that energy doesn't get stuck in the system of the physically, even mentally, the disease in the body, the disease of the mind. These are very real experiences, and I'm just putting forth that the simple practice of flow dynamics in my life being an experiment to see, because I began practicing this principle and using my life as an example, as an experiment. I began when I was, technically I began when I was 18, because that's when I met my Kung Fu teacher. And he showed me the Shaolin system and the healing art form. I was interested in the full aspect of the martial arts, but less so in the I wasn't interested at all in the competitive nature that some people go into. I wasn't interested in specifically in the fighting per se. I was more interested in the bridge between the body, mind, and something deeper. And although I was raised in New York City in a time when it was bankrupt, and there was a phase of my life that I went through my early teens where I was getting mugged almost 30 times or plus, 30 plus times a year, if you can imagine. Now, they only got something from me the very first time, and the rest of the time I navigated out of those situations in one form or the other, either by running as fast as I could, or if you were surrounded by 5 people, which happened on a few occasions, dealing with it the best way you could. And so there was some street smarts, and perhaps part of me in some way saw the Shaolin martial arts as a way that I could resolve a few dynamics. But ultimately, Shaolin's a little bit unique in the martial arts realm, is because they were founded on a Buddhist principle, or there's this notion of the sanctity of life. So even when someone's maybe acting out aggressively from an illusional state, that's where those come from. The idea was to how to hold the sanctity of their life in check while still bringing the situation to resolve in the most graceful ways possible. And I like that about the Shaolin system. It wasn't about, let me see how quickly I can break this person down into a pile of rubble. No, the idea was, how can I resolve this conflict as gracefully as possible with the least amount of damage either potentially inflicted on me or the person who's acting from a deluded state. That's touching the ice tip, the tip of the iceberg with the profoundness of the Shaolin system, which brought much to me. And of course, I found later in life all these parallels between the Eastern art forms and different calligraphic techniques and Japanese art forms as well. But I want to get back to the point that all that to say, there's an integration with all these dynamics. And in my view, I'm looking at my creative life, my art practice as, my central therapeutic process, my meditative practice. It's body oriented, it's mind oriented, and it's spirit oriented. Consciousness is kind of weaving through all these things, and with the purpose of dissolving those blockages, whether they're in the body that can become, as I was touching on earlier, physical ailments. Just look at it. You get anxious for a test and you feel butterflies in your stomach. So we know there's a correlation between the mind and the body. Now, what happens if you're having a lifelong mental issue about being, something that you haven't let go of, that holds in your heart negativity, and you think about it every day and every day and every day, something that happened 10 years ago, and it hasn't perhaps been processed in a certain way energetically through your system. And I'm not an advocate of forgetting, and I'm not an advocate of medicating per se. I'm not saying it shouldn't or can't be utilized, but I'm doing my best to find my way to face these things and process them energetically through my system by being aware, being vulnerable, being truthful. That's why I have the Love and Truth icon that came to me in the late 90s. It's tattooed on my wrist, and I often sign my work with it. I've gone through phases, but it points as a reminder to me that my consciousness is mine. Or if it's not to say it's mine per se, because that could be what we all are. But my own thinking apparatus within me, that is mine regardless of what's happened to me in my life. And that is to say then, regardless of what happens, it's what I do with it. And if everything can be poison transformed into medicine or seeking the silver lining, then every experience can be looked at as a wound, or it can become wisdom in some way. And so by being conscious about energy in my system, and if something negative surfaces to me, it's not to block it out. And it's not to obsess over it either, even though many of us can relate to being obsessive compulsive and or having variations of things. And I say, let's let go of that marker, and so that we allow the elasticity of possibility to enter our life. And that means we can transcend these things. Whatever behaviors we've picked up, we can also rewrite. Anyways, this is how I look at it. And by doing that, I'm allowing myself to sit in the captain seat of my own life and not look at experiences in life, other people, any circumstances that may happen through society or opportunities lost or whatever it might be, and blame or point to those things, because I'm saying to myself, if I'm the captain of my ship, everything that comes my way can be utilized as a step to grow in some form or fashion. And by do that, I'm actually transforming those negative energies into positive energy. There's a science to this. It could be looked at from a scientific point. It can be looked at from a spiritual perspective. It doesn't matter what school system anyone comes to. When we're looking at this from a very pragmatic place, I'm just surrendering to the moment and being in a very accepting place. I'm practicing that. With an exercise that's fun, because making art, making music, because I do this in musical context too, with people who are enjoyable to the idea of improvising sonically. There's so many ways to do it. I know acting school environments have many playful ways of establishing this kind of flow state. And it's something that I've been fascinated by. It was intuitive to me when I was a little kid. The portfolio that I assembled by my father's recommendation just happened to be the things I was making for him as a little kid. I never went to an art class.
Sorry, I didn't understand that.
Oh, Siri. Yeah, I never went to an art class. I just intuitively created. And when I went to university, art school, design school, and did my master's in art and design in Italy, those places taught me other things. They taught me how to, use tools. They taught me techniques. They even taught me the discipline, perhaps, of bringing an idea to reality by the infrastructure. But nobody really had the language of developing my relationship with my intuitive compass, my source, that thing that is unique to each individual. And when I'm talking about the creative experience, it's about flowering a unique aspect that is you and nobody else. And the school system didn't have that. And in fact, in some ways, the school system showed me other ways and pushed other ways on me. And for a little while, I was lost, because by doing it their way, I lost touch with my own compass, because they were having me think and sketch in advance what the idea needs to be. And all these ideas and processes were premeditated intellectual processes. But because they weren't aware of me and perhaps don't have the language of intuition, assumed every creative finds their own way to that, inadvertently, it kind of temporarily threw me into a quandary of, I'm blocked, I'm empty. I couldn't figure out why. Nothing was coming to me. I'm even referring to a specific incident in a jewelry making class I took as an elective. Until I realized one day and looked, and for 2 months I was, the project was to design a ring. And for 6 weeks, I sat there with a sketchbook. I'm not a drawer. I'm not that kind of guy who looks and renders, looks at trees and can render the tree, looks at a human, looks at a hand, look at objects. I don't render from a real reality. But I adapted painting as a way to express myself. But I'm not a classic artist in that sense. And that notion anyways died in the 17th century. We need to rebuild. Artistry shouldn't be determined by your skill set as a drawing person. But that's not to say that doesn't have great value if you want to develop that. But no one told us these things. I had to realize myself by rediscovering who I am. And how did I do that? Well, in my case, one big moment was 6 weeks of wrestling with a sketchbook, trying to draw an idea. It just did not work for me. That was not my way, and I couldn't find my expression that way. And the teacher was very sweet, a very sweet guy, and he just felt terrible for me. I was going to be his first F he ever gave in a jewelry making class, simply because I had nothing, and there was 2 weeks left, and everybody else was already far along in creating their three-dimensional jewelry objects. So one day after class, everyone's left, and I'm just sitting in the jewelry making room, which was a really cool big industrial space. I looked in the big garbage bin to my right, and what did I see? Just all this thrown out material, the leftovers of what people cut from this and that, copper, that, metal wires, this, and all kinds of debris, but was everyone else's trash. And what was my roots? I loved assembling things intuitively. And I just went into a shift and started picking up all these pieces of garbage that I thought were beautiful. The curl and curve of this little piece of metal, the pattern texture in that one, the patina in this one. And within 2 weeks, I had assembled a collection of brooches. I think there were like 14 brooches that I made. And it was done rapidly and at night. So nobody was really aware of what I was doing. And because there wasn't really a rule, no one ever explicitly said, you don't have to draw the idea out first. They just assumed that's how it needed to be done. So it's what was said to be done. But that didn't work for me. I didn't think of ideas first. I needed a way for the experience to come through me. Teachers weren't capable to guide me in that way. I had to discover it on my own. And the moral of that journey was, I got an A. They were flabbergasted. They couldn't believe. The students and the teacher couldn't understand how it came to be. And I couldn't understand how it couldn't be understood. Because to me, there was no effort. There was no stress. There was no struggle. And at the root base of it was the joy of creating. And it was a fun, loving experience. And I realized, wow, that is what the flow experience is about for me. That's at the root of what the creative experience is for me, whether it's applied to brooches, paintings, photography, music, accounting, innovation, business, objects of design, technological tools, new software innovations, engineering of bridges and spaceships. It doesn't matter what it is. But there's something profound, something beyond us, something accessible that we can touch when we allow ourselves to be in this vulnerable, dynamic state that I refer to as a flow experience, which we can go into word for word endlessly, but the best way to know it is to experience it. So my suggestion is grab a piece of paper, grab a pen or pencil, and just relax and let it wander with no responsibility, no objective, no determination, nothing. There's no mistakes, there's no rules, and just experience that as an exercise and enjoy it. See what happens. That's something that I find to be incredibly enjoyable to do. And I've gone through phases of my life. There are periods where I did this day in and day out. And so I have thousands and thousands of these drawings that are archived in chronological order, and they've gone and they tell that story, but at the ultimate end of the day, they're just part of the joy of being in a creative flow state. And that's what I wish for everybody to touch in their life and see how it may bring and flower their potential for a better world.